Let me just say, as we're getting started, I can see on our screen, we've got Jack and Taylor, and welcome to you all. We had Taylor, maybe you shut off your screen, which is fine. Can both of you hear us here?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Well, please stay with us for a few minutes, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from you as well. But we're going to start by hearing from the Agency of Agriculture.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. I have some suggested language I can hand out if you'd like. I didn't have a chance to forward it over, but it's just some thoughts that we've had. I want to say, because I don't know that I've talked to you formally yet this year, maybe briefly, but I just, when I was looking at this and when I received the invite to come over, it just reminds me that all year we sort of grapple, when you're not in session, we grapple with how to apply the laws fairly. And you can't imagine how much we value the relationship that we have with all of you. Try to make things work when we're regulating folks and we're trying to be fair and when we're trying to support farmers, but also make sure they're following the rules. So thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you always for listening. We really we're so fortunate. Not all committees have the same kind of relationships with their agency that they work with, and we're so appreciative to have this. We always know we're going to be heard regardless of whether or not you agree with us, and that's invaluable to us as we try to work through these things. So on this point, on H603, we're delighted that this fits within the federal law, first and foremost, because that's key for us to be able to have a viable program is that we work within the federal law. Whenever it comes to slaughter, we're always trying to balance the need to enable our small farmers to grow and to be able to produce, and also to make sure that our food is safe to eat and the consumers are protected. So it's always balancing those lines and how we do it. This proposal and this law, like I said, it stays within federal law, so that's wonderful. We do think there's a couple of ways that could tighten up the language a little bit that would still fit within what we think the committee is trying to do. So I'll start with the big one first. As I understand it, the committee simply wants to enable the poultry farmers who are exempt to be able to part their birds and sell the parts. So that's something that we can support. We think it's wise to be a little bit more specific than that. And there's a definition in federal law that's called ready to cook poultry. And that defines exactly what it is. It's in the language at the very top of what I shared with you. But right now we just have whole bird, which, as people have already talked about, is not defined in any way, which obviously you don't want to sell your bird with certain organs that are still in it that could contaminate the meat. So it's certainly valuable to know what it is you can do and what you can't do. And we think rather than using poultry parts, which can potentially lead to a lot of different types of processing other than just parting the bird and selling it, it makes sense to use a definition that already exists under federal law. Ready to cook poultry just means it's raw. You can cut it up in any way that's permissible and sell it, and you could grind it as well in this particular example, but it would be raw, ready to cook food. So we suggest that instead of saying poultry parts, which can, and Julie can explain this a lot better than I can if you need, but the risk is that the longer that you spend processing something, the more chance there is for contamination, and particularly for bacterial growth, Salmonella and Campylobacter being the big ones. So you after you slaughter the bird, you want to cool it down as quickly as possible and keep it at that level, keep it to a safe temperature while you're processing it. Because if you don't keep it at that temperature, then that's when the bacteria can grow and spread. It's very hard to do that if you're in an outdoor facility. It can be very hard to do that. So the idea is like, let's whole bird makes sense that people don't want to buy or sell whole birds, but let's keep them raw. So at least there's not additional processing time, greater risk, and let's utilize the definition that exists to try to do that. So that's the kind of first thing on that first page. The other on the next changes are small.
I'm sorry, I just interrupted.
Yeah, of course.
You gave me an opening.
Yes.
Small. I can't read this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Do we have it? Do we have an electronic version?
I didn't get a chance to send it over. I can afterward. But I can read it out loud if you want. I know the text is very small in this. Would you like me to or not?
We got a 14.2.
I think it would be helpful, yeah, with my old eyes.
Okay. I'm gonna take off my glasses and get it nice and close. So it's ready to cook poultry means any slaughtered poultry free from protruding pin feathers and vestigial feathers, in parentheses, hair or down, from which the head, feet, crop, oil gland, trachea, esophagus, entrails, and lungs have been removed, and from which the mature reproductive organs and kidneys may have been removed, and with or without the giblets, and which is suitable for cooking without need of further processing. And I think that's probably some key language, suitable for cooking without need of further processing. It's further defined as ready to cook poultry also means any cut up or disjointed portion of poultry or other parts of poultry, such as reproductive organs, head or feet, that are suitable for cooking without need of further processing. So what we suggest is adopting that existing definition. And instead of, when you're talking about selling poultry directly to consumers or to restaurants, just insert that ready to cook poultry instead of poultry parts. Then you just have a better definition of what it is that you can do if you're selling from your farm, selling from a farm stand, or if you're selling directly to to restaurants who are cooking it on their own. So that, yes.
Sorry. Is there a definition for giblets?
I think it's the internal organs. I think it's liver, heart. What else? Julie, is that?
Neck.
Yep, and that can be part of it too. That's more part of the carcass, but yes, that can be involved with this as well.
And this is inclusive, ready to cook poultry of ground meat as well.
My read of this definition does not preclude someone from grinding the meat.
Okay.
Steve, when we talked to Elizabeth Roma, she cuts up chickens a lot. She said if you part it out, there are pieces left that people use for stock or maybe for their animal like stuff, you know, with the animals. Is that considered, you know, that byproduct, would those be considered ready to cook? If you make stock, for example.
Well, the way that I read this whole exemption is that it's permissible to sell these to household consumers for human consumption. I'm not saying that, I don't know how, if you're selling poultry parts for someone's dogs, I'm not sure honestly where that fits in. I haven't looked into that question. The idea of these definitions, though, I think when you talk about household consumers, I think you mean I understand pets eat poultry parts too. But in terms of, and Julie, if I'm saying anything that's wrong, please.
No, that's okay, but I can just add, so I think you're talking about like probably the backs of the chickens that are not really, you know, just gonna use that, except they're gonna use it probably in stock, right? There's lots of facilities out there that actually sell those parts. And one is my veterinarian, you know, that we can buy for them.
Yep.
But it's for human consumption at that time. It's not processed into pet food. It's not ground. It's not processed, period. It's just part of the chicken that is being sold, and people do buybacks for either pet food or stock. So that would be something the consumer, once they purchase it, would do that process.
Right. I think there's a movement in the pet world where you can feed raw chicken bones to dogs, and it's not dangerous, I'm like cooked ones.
My read is this exemption is designed for what you can sell to a household. Then what the household does with it, I think ultimately is up to them. But this is the idea of the poultry producer. What can they do, and who can they sell it to, and how does it have to be done? And all we're suggesting is let's define that more clearly so that everyone knows what they can and can't do. And then the next piece is sort of in line with that. You know, right now we have the three levels of exemptions, the 1,000, 5,000, 20,000. We suggest that in the language that we just make who you can sell to identical. Right now, there's a little bit of difference between the under 1,000 and 5 and the 20. And it says in the 1,000 that you can sell from your farm or a farmer's market, but it doesn't mention directly to household consumer. We suggest just making that uniform for all three of them. We think that's the intent, is that if you meet within any of these exemptions, you can sell directly to a household consumer from your farm from a farmer's market or to a restaurant. And so we just suggest making that identical instead of this different. And the only other thing really substantively we suggest, excuse me, is that right now, there's no labeling requirement for the under 1,000 threshold. And the label is something you can go to our website, you can print it. It should not be a significant cost, but it simply says who the producer is, that it was not inspected meat, and then it's exempt under the state law, or it can say the federal law, I think. But it's a labeling so that people know what they're getting. And we think that if you're going to buy, especially when you're buying a whole bird, you're more likely to know exactly. But if you're getting parts of the bird, we'd like them to know what they're getting. And so we suggest that adding to the label, as you say, the name of the product, not just the producer, and that it's exempt from inspection, but also the name of the product. And we suggest just making that uniform for all the producers. So regardless of whether you're selling 950 birds or 19,000 birds, you have a label that just just notifying people, this was produced on the, it's not inspected. This is the producer. So in part, that's for traceability too. So if somebody does get sick, you've got a label. If, ideally, what farm you went to, but maybe you went to 4 farms. It's just nice to have that label. It's required for everyone else already. But we think that if we're going to get into parts, why not just make it uniform throughout the producers, that everybody who's selling parted chicken is identifying it and creating that label. So I think the language, I can go through the language if you want, but I know you've got a lot of other witnesses. That's really all that we're, asking to do is just tighten it up a little bit so that consumers know what they're getting and farms know what they can do. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Just on the first request, that definition, are you proposing that we insert this language as is, or are you proposing, and would it be possible to reference or refer to the federal definition without including all of this text in statute?
So there's a separate definitional section in this chapter. And so I suggest not putting it in the exemption, but in that definitional, which is 6 VSA 3302.
Yeah.
There's at least 3 different ways you could do it. You could do it right now. I just copied the text from the federal regulation. The other way to do it would be to cite the federal regulation. The benefit of that is if the federal law changes, then this law changes automatically with it. The problem with that is a lot of people don't necessarily, when they're looking at state statutes, don't necessarily track down the federal reg. It's kind of easy for a lawyer to do, not necessarily easy for a farmer to do. If you're looking at the guidelines and the procedures and you get cited to a federal reg, going to look at it may or may. So the idea is it's easier to have it right there. The third way I would say is you could put the language, but then also make it clear that if the federal reg is amended, that this definition is automatically amended. So I think any of those are viable options. It wouldn't expand the exemption language at all because it goes in the definitional section, but you can at least look back to the definitions in the same chapter.
I'm not seeing any other questions. So just to summarize the second recommendation, it was essentially, in theory anyway, less restrictive, more permissive to allow, to expand who customers could be, to include direct to consumers.
I think it's to be clearer, like right now it says, and for the 1,000 bird exemption, it says from a farmer's market or to a restaurant. There's no mention of directly to household consumer. In the 5,000 and the 10,000, it is mentioned directly to household consumer, but it's actually mentioned right now after the farmer's market. So it's a little unclear whether that's meant to be an additional, like, can you be on the side of the road selling it? Or to me, it's not as clear as it could be. So it would just be direct to household consumer, which is farmer's market or restaurant. It doesn't have to be drawn that way, but it seems to make sense to have that clarity if that's the intent.
Good, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
So we have the Blackbirds with us via Zoom this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And if you'd like to share any thoughts that you have on this piece of legislation that we're considering. I hope that you've had a chance to, pretty straightforward. So I'm assuming you've had a chance to come up to speed on what it is we're talking about. And we'd be very interested in hearing what your thoughts are.
Sure. Can everybody hear me? Good?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, we've reviewed H603 and the revisions to be made, and we're honestly pretty excited about it. My name's Bob. This is Taylor.
Hi.
We own and operate Lucky Fields LLC, which we are predominantly a pasture-raised poultry farm, selling direct to customers, predominantly at the Norwich Farmers Market. We also do gardening and land maintenance and whatnot under our business. But the chicken is the real business that we're in. We have been farming for quite a while. We've been raising pasture poultry for over a decade in all different variations, from 200 birds up to working for other farms and operations that raise up to 16,000 birds or more. Some of which operate under the federal exemption of the 20,000 birds, both farms here and in other states. I'm excited about this possibility because I think it would have huge economic impact for farmers like myself and others all across the state. The USDA tells us that we eat about 68 pounds of chicken per person in this country per year. And that's the actual meat, not necessarily the whole chicken. That translates to about 3 pounds per bird, which is equivalent to about 23 chickens per person per year. That, if I did my math right, that comes out to, for Vermont alone, that's over 14 million chickens a year. We eat something, I believe it's over like 10 billion chickens a year in this country alone. So the economic possibilities to expand sales and local food production, I see here as being like huge and phenomenal. Ourselves, we moved to Vermont in 2019, worked on some other farms. We started our business in 2021, right?
2022.
2022, sorry.
They all
so
blend together after a while.
we work by the seasons, not necessarily the year. So we've had 2 full seasons operating our business. Our first season, we raised 750 birds, which was actually 150 birds more than we planned on raising because customer demand was so high. We made some adaptations throughout the season to bring more product to people. Of those 750 birds, we processed 250 of them as whole, and the rest were cut into parts. We were able to do this by bringing our birds to a USDA processor in Rhode Island. We are both from Rhode Island. I know the farmers there that operate that processing facility pretty well, and that was an option that seemed viable to us. We ran the numbers, and it was going to work, and so far has been working. USDA processing options available in the region are pretty limited. There are a few options in Vermont, but they're not necessarily viable based on either capacity of the processor themselves or just their willingness to offer processing for other producers. It's a 2.5-hour drive down to Rhode Island. We have family down there. We can stay with them and make the trip worthwhile. It's a multi-day trip, but what it did was allow us to bring products to customers that they wanted. So based on our first year and last year's numbers,
Last year we increased our numbers to 1,650 birds.
right.
With 450 of them being whole birds.
Yeah, so that means 2/3 of our birds get cut up and sold as parts. What that tells me is that customers want convenience. It was really interesting. So we were supposed to tune in the other day and we didn't get a chance to, but we did watch the whole presentation from the New England Food System Planners Partnership. And it was fascinating to see all of that information and how it relates to Vermont and New England in general and the local food system. I'm super excited to have that as a reference. I also work for Food Connects, which is a local food distributor, source verified out of Brownsville. I'm a driver for them. So we're pretty deeply entrenched in the local food network. These numbers hold up nationally too. This 60 to 70%. We're members of APPA, APPPA, the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association. And what that does is it allows us to plug into other farmers and other producers, including processors and everything, to talk with them. We were on a bunch of listservs and everything, so we're able to converse with other producers. And the general consensus is that yes, people want parts. They want their convenience. They want I always joke, nobody wants to touch their meat. They want to cut open a package and slide their chicken breast out onto the grill, which I tend to try to educate customers to do other things. I love to hear, about people cooking and what they're doing with our products and everything. So I could give you some real specific numbers if I really dug into it about our operation. But what it comes down to is that this change would allow us to retain a significant amount of savings. Currently, it would allow us to save about $5 per chicken that we produce, which at our current scale, we'd be saving about $6,000 a year. That's $6,000 either to reinvest into the business or as just retained income
Pay
for
ourselves.
We have a goal to continue growing our business to the scale of about 4,500 to 6,000 birds per year. We think that's something that we can manage on our own. Obviously, based on the numbers that I mentioned before, like that's not even a drop in the bucket of what is possible in the market for local food. And that would end up translating to about $15,000 to $20,000 of retained earnings just for us alone. Obviously, this doesn't account for additional overhead costs. There are labeling requirements, infrastructure, and all that stuff that we want to step into to be able to, step up to be able to bring a product to customers that they really want. Vacuum sealing packages is really important for freezer storage, et cetera. And there's things that that would be really important to bring into that. This is our whole business. We know a lot of other farmers who raise smaller amounts of poultry, and some of that has to do with the current restriction of the whole bird rule. And I know folks would be willing to cut up package and part out birds for their customers who have a demand for that. Relating back to the presentation that you all saw the other day and talking about like resilience in the food system in New England, the pandemic was wild to be witness to while working on farms. I saw 150 member CSAs shoot up to 350 members. I saw meat sales from other meat producers that we know double for the entire year. It was really, really interesting to see how grocery store shelves were empty, and here in Vermont, which seems like we have farmer friends who always joke about it being the promised land for farming, it's really interesting to have seen that happen and be able to turn around to their neighbors and say, can I buy from you to ensure food security? And that was, so I think something like this would be like really, really significant for local food producers and poultry producers specifically. Anything to add?
So Bob talked a lot about all the numbers. I think for us and our business, like he said, it's a 3-day process to bring our birds down to a USDA facility. What that looks like is two of us and our 2-year-old daughter going out to the field, sometimes until 11 o'clock at night, midnight, collecting birds. And then myself and our 2-year-old loading back up in the car about 2 o'clock in the morning to make he said 2.5 hours. It's usually pulling a trailer about 3.5 hour drive down to the USDA facility to make it there by their deadline of 7 a.m. And so, and then of course we have to wait in line until it's our turn to drop our birds off and have them unloaded and processed. And then we're lucky enough to have family down there. So I get to stay with my mom for the day and zone out on the couch because I've only gotten an hour of sleep. And then, the next morning we wait for the processor to call. Sometimes it's at 10 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it's at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At which time I load my 2-year-old back up in the car. It's now, day 3 of trucking her around, and go and load up another few thousand pounds of chicken and make the 3-hour drive home, have dinner, put her to bed, and unload it into the freezers until 11 o'clock at night. So this is the producers that are going down to a USDA facility. That's what their week looks like on processing weeks. And so for me, it's more about kind of having a work-life balance, allowing us to stay home at that time and do the work ourselves. I'm much more willing to do a 12-hour day in my own backyard than I am, on the road driving through Worcester and Boston and Providence and all of that. So for me, it's definitely a lot of the financial benefit, but also just the work-life balance and having a more comfortable, situation for our family. A lot of farmers are working without employees. A lot of farmers are working while being a stay-at-home parent or, working around school schedules with young children. And so allowing this work to be done actually in their backyard on farm would be a huge change for, work-life balance and family comfort. Yeah.
I just have one last thing, and then if you have any questions, or we can move on to somebody else. There's customer demand for this too, and I think that's really important to consider because as representatives, you're not just thinking about what we want. One of the things that we have in our market display, we call a transparency window, where we show our customers our practices to the best of our ability. We have a picture of our feed label. We have a little description of what our day-to-day operations look like, memberships that we're part of and everything. One of the things that we tell people is that we go to the USDA processor in Rhode Island, and of all of the things on that little display, that's the one that has been most contentious with our potential customers. They ask, why don't you process in Vermont? Why don't you process on farm? And we have to then go through the whole explanation of the legalities around it and explain to them. And it's an emotional response, but it's really interesting because we've even had folks who have these like strange prejudices around local food production, so much so that we've had customers tell us that they would prefer that we drive to Maine. There's a USDA processor there, which is over 6 hours away from us, over driving south to Rhode Island, which is only 2.5 hours away from us. And so it's really interesting. But my point is that customers want us to be able to produce and process chicken locally and bring it to them.
Yeah, we're constantly getting emails like, can you skirt around the law and just process it and cut it up just for me? And we're like, no, we can't. I'd love to be able to do that, but I'm not willing to skirt the law to do that. So you just have to, deal with us driving. But yeah, we have a lot of people requesting this of us.
So
Thank you very much.
I talk fast when I'm presenting. If you have any questions, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do have a couple of questions, and then we'll turn to Jack. But I just wanted to say thank you. I think that really helps us better understand what the alternative is. You're living the alternative. Representative Templeman.
Thank you. Of the parts that are being produced, are you producing ground meat? And if we were to lift the regulations on this to be inclusive of parts, but restricted ground meat, would you be harmed by that somehow?
We're not producing ground meat. We've actually looked into options to do that. We think chicken sausage and ground chicken would sell really well. As the law is right now, we aren't able to do that. Processing through USDA, we have been interested and searched around for a co-packer, right? A butcher shop to be able to take our USDA inspected product and make it into a product for us that we could then sell legally. We haven't been able to do that. Well,
it's been cost restrictive.
It's been cost restrictive
when you have the USDA cost, and then you also have to pay the co-packer to grind it and make the sausage. It comes out to, what did we figure, about $19 a pound to have a ground chicken sausage, which may be totally fine for a small percentage of the population to pay for, but most people are saying $19 a pound is too
Yeah.
high.
My, my understandings of the current laws, I'm pretty sure the Vermont Department of Ag meat inspection already has stipulations around ground meats in state inspected facilities and everything. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I don't think like ground meats are always a sticky area because you're often adding other things to them in sausages, for example. So like there's potential for other contaminants. Taking a chicken and just cutting it up, you know, if it's already got bacteria on it, all those parts already have bacteria on it. But when you're introducing spices and herbs and all of that stuff, there's other problems associated with that. So it wouldn't have an economic impact on us right now, but man, yeah, I'd love to be able to build out a clean space, get that space just inspected as though you would any other restaurant or butcher shop and say, yeah, you're good to go. What's your plan for dealing with ground meats, and then getting the go ahead to be able to do that? Proper labeling, all that stuff. Those are all considerations that we think about pretty regularly when talking about these things. Did that actually answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay.
Representative O'Brien?
One quick question is, where's your farm? What town?
We're in Chester.
We're in Chester.
Oh, okay.
We operate on leased land. We don't own our own farm. We moved up here in 2019. Taylor actually went to school at Green Mountain College. Rest in peace. And
Yeah.
so she had a love for the area, and we wanted to get out of Rhode Island. There's twice as many people down there as there are up here, and the rural living is something that I like fell in love with somewhere else.
Yeah.
But anyway, so land access is another thing that I'd love to talk to you all about, but I realize that's not pertinent to this.
So my question was, you figured out a workaround to the restriction, the state statute restriction already by taking your birds to this USDA plant in Rhode Island. And I'm just wondering, you know, can you paint a picture of, say, the Norwich Farmers Market, where does that give you an advantage? I assume there are other chicken farmers there selling their whole birds, and people are like, wait, Lucky Fields has actually parts, you can go over there and buy them. Or are there New Hampshire farmers there that are selling chicken parts too?
We're the only ones with chicken parts, and our average is about 8 whole birds per market throughout the season, and about the equivalent of 25 parted out birds per market throughout the season on average.
Yeah.
So yeah, it gives us a huge advantage.
Yeah, we first stepped foot on the market in 2019 when we were working for another farm. We were in the area. We were living in Norwich. We decided to go to the market, check it out. And I was actually blown away that there weren't any chicken producers. And then I looked into the laws and everything. Some folks there also sell whole birds in diversified operations, vegetables, other meats, and whole birds and everything. I
think there are 5 vendors besides ourselves who sell whole birds off farm.
Yeah.
And in talking to them, they're selling between 3 and 5 whole birds per market. I think we're able to sell a few more because it is our only business. They see a big chicken on our sign and go, oh, I bet they have chicken. Whereas everybody else is mixing it with veggies and other meats and that sort of thing. So
I won't lie, other producers have come to us and be like, how do you sell chicken? And I've told them, like, the parts make the big difference, but they're even amazed when we tell them that we're selling 8 to 10 whole birds every week. And I don't know what that means. We've put a lot of thought and effort into our market display and our marketing and how we, talk about our product and produce our product. We think it is different and is something, worthwhile. I do know of other producers in Vermont that in other areas. There's a couple down in the Putney area that are also doing parts. They've gone the route of either doing the same thing we are, or spending who knows how much money to get to set up a small USDA inspected facility. And they have an inspector come on scheduled dates to be able to inspect their product and then bring it. But the overhead costs for that are just like, it's not something we could ever afford.
Well, and
So
it-
it wasn't really an
a lot
option.
of farmers are working on leased land to dump, a few $100,000 into a USDA inspected facility.
Yeah.
And, this is we're going into our third season of farming. In 2 years, we've been on 2 different farms because leases haven't worked out.
Yeah.
And so to spend that much money just to have to move is just not something we're ever willing to do. And nor is it a sound business decision, I think. So I think a lot of farms are in that same position.
Yeah. I
Let's
think we
have,
came into the, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, finish here, yeah.
I think we came into that market realizing that there were other producers there selling chicken, but I think what we've been able to do is come in and show that the demand is there for the product from the customers, because all of those producers are still selling their 3 to 4 birds every market. They have their devoted customers and everything. We saw a hole in the market and came in and wanted to fill it. And like I said, we were able to run the numbers and make it work. But this would change that. This would be a significant impact on our business.
Representative Levitt, and then we'll turn to Jack.
I was just gonna ask, and I apologize if I missed this, is there no place in Vermont where you can process chickens at a USDA facility?
Yes, there is.
Yeah, sorry.
Mhm.
There's Maple Winds Farm, which is honestly, it's the same distance from our house as it is to go to Rhode Island, except I have a place to stay in Rhode Island. It still takes 2 days to process, so it would actually be twice as much driving to go to Maple Winds from our property here in Chester as it is to go down to Rhode Island and stay with my mom. So that's one reason why we've decided not to go with them. The other reason is that they can only process about 100, or last time we spoke to them anyway, they could only process about 150 birds at a time into parts, and we're doing batches of 300. So they just simply couldn't at the time anyway, handle our numbers. We haven't spoken to them in about a year about it because that kind of closed us off. But
I actually spoke to Bruce, one of the owners, a couple months ago, and it's just a matter of capacity. They don't have the capacity to take on somebody of our scale, and we're not even that large. They produce 16,000 chickens for themselves every year, and then are processing for others.
And then there's also Sweet Pickings Farm and Leaping Bear Farm, and I think it's Sweet Pickings. They take other they process for other farmers as well. I believe they've started doing that, but again, it's only really small batches.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, Taylor and Bob, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And,
thanks for letting us.
Jack, you've been listening. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us where you farm, and then if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you. Everything that Bob and Taylor said, that's all extremely helpful and informative. I have a couple things I can add on to that. My name's Jack. I live in South Royalton, Vermont. My farm name is Green Man Farms, and I'm going into my second full season raising poultry in Vermont. I've worked in poultry operations in a few other states for about 5 years and been veggie farming before that. This past year, I raised 100 chickens, 50 ducks, and 35 turkeys, and I'm one of those people that also sells at the market that they're at in Norwich, but mainly direct to consumer because the whole birds are harder to move. I do not part my birds up. The numbers haven't made sense for me to do so. What they're doing is incredible, and it doesn't take anything away from that. But I am farming on the side right now, mainly doing carpentry, because the numbers are harder to work out with something like whole birds compared to other operations that I've worked at, and trying to work my way into it gradually. My main clients are direct to consumer and personal chefs. I have no problem moving my product at the small number I'm doing, but I anticipate as I grow my business that those numbers will um, definitely not be able to be sold all as whole birds through personal evidence of what I've seen myself from talking to other farmers and what I've seen in other states. It's just the whole birds are a huge, huge barrier to growth. This issue we're talking about today, the poultry slaughter exemption, is really important to me and farmers across the state, and it's one of a few issues that gives us a disadvantage over larger producers and people who have higher capacity and more capital. And a small change like this would make a really big difference in the ability of small poultry farmers to grow their businesses and provide a more resilient food economy for Vermont, as they already touched on. So ways that I see that this would impact my personal business would be I would get access to a much larger market, mainly at farmers markets and direct to consumer sales, and with chefs. They want parted up birds. They don't want whole birds. So it greatly increases the market that I would have access to there. And it also opens up the new market that's been touched on previously with dog food and people who are interested in feeding their pets healthier options. And that's something that I've observed in other states besides Vermont. Virginia is the best example I have of it. I worked on a farm doing diversified livestock, and we had a very devoted people audience, but we also had a devoted pet food audience. And the numbers and margins around being able to part up a bird, sell the things to consumers that they want for their personal consumption, and then take those parts that are not wanted by people and sell them for dog food was it's what makes the numbers work to be able to sell in the case of chickens, necks and backs is the main one, but also feet, heads, and livers and hearts. The discussion earlier in this call with previous was really interesting to listen to, and I totally hear where I'm coming from. I would also advocate for the sale of at least livers and hearts from poultry. As far as differences that this rule change would have on my production, I think there's some really important nuances that being able to sell birds for parts, the difference that has. It basically, at the end of the day, what it means is that not every bird has to be perfect. Throughout a day when you're processing, you'll have a chicken get stuck in the plucker and its wing will break. And if you can only sell a whole bird, then that's an ugly bird. That's a bird that's not going to sell, or you have to offer at a discount. Whereas if you're cutting it up, you're losing maybe a quarter pound of wings, which is a low price per pound item, but you're still able to sell the rest of the bird totally fine, nothing wrong with it, at a higher price. So you have things like broken wings, or if you're having a tough day with ducks or other waterfowl, with scalding and defeathering them. If you have a bird come out that still has a bunch of pin feathers, again, you don't have to spend 15 minutes pulling every single pin feather out of it and lose a ton of time, slows your day down, demotivates the whole crew. You can instead say, okay, don't spend 15 minutes on that bird. We'll be able to part that bird up and sell it totally fine without having to worry about it being a perfect whole bird. So it would speed up processing. It would make business more efficient, and yeah, in general, just raises margins around the edges on things like that. Bob and Taylor also talked about, they touched on the numbers and the differences that breaking a bird up for part versus selling whole birds, the profit and number difference. And I just had a slide that I wanted to share threw together with general numbers, but just to kind of illustrate the kind of difference that you could have for small poultry producers by allowing us to break birds up into parts. So I'm just gonna share this slide here. So this is a high-end item. This is an organic chicken, pastured chicken. So just keep that in mind with these numbers, but the percentages work out about the same no matter what you're talking about. If you have a 4.5 pound chicken, which is pretty reasonable in standard size, and you can only sell it as a whole bird at $6 a pound, you're looking at getting $27 for that bird. With this proposed change, 603, you would be able to break that bird up into parts, sell different parts at higher price per pound, and different parts at lower price per pound than the whole bird. But on total, you're looking at making this is assuming that you're able to sell things like livers and hearts and feet. I made this the discussion earlier. But you're looking at a sizable increase in sales and higher profit margins from being able to take a whole bird to a bird in parts. And it's obviously not that straightforward. You've heard previously that there's investments you have to make in order to sell birds as parts, and it takes more time. But these things are all this is just an example to show how this change can have a really sizable impact for small poultry farmers in a historically low profit margin business farming, and greatly increase your sales. So yeah, just wanted to share that. And okay. Cool. Yeah, and my last point I wanted to make is that I mentioned earlier, I'm a farmer and carpenter. Carpentry is what I do for money, and farming is my passion and what I'd like to be doing full time. But for various reasons, land access being one of them, but profit margins being another. And this change would allow that transition from doing something that I do for money for something that I want to do because I love to do it, and people want it. The demand is there. It allows me to be a farmer more full time. A change like this makes the numbers make way more sense for poultry farming, and would be really excited about the change. So I'm really appreciative for this time to be able to speak to this, and really appreciative of Rural Vermont and other groups for bringing this to the attention of the state. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Jack, thank you. And could you, after we're finished today, and maybe you already have, but if you could send that slide to Sidonia, our committee assistant, and we'll post it on our page. Really useful, very, very helpful to sort of see the map broken out that way.
Yeah, totally. And don't take that as gospel. Those are the numbers. Well, it's a good example. And
if you want to edit it first, that's fine too. If you're not comfortable sending it, that's also fine.
No, happy to. No, those numbers are as accurate as I would make it. Yeah, great.
Let's see. Let's take a question or two here. Representative Templeman.
So regarding your spreadsheet, you're showing a finished product. If we're talking whole bird at 4.5 pounds, I'm going to imagine that you've raised that bird for 6 to 7 weeks. If you were to add an extra week, maybe even 2, you're looking at maybe like a 5.5, 6 pound bird. Would that then change your bottom line with the parts, meaning a larger profit margin?
It depends on the product. Duck is something that I specialize in and something that I continue to grow. You only have certain processing windows for ducks. They rotate in feathers in waves. You can only process them between 7 to 8 weeks and 12 to 13 weeks, or else they can't be they can't be plucked properly. So it's not an option for something like ducks. Turkeys are very much size dependent offering. When I take reservations for Thanksgiving turkeys, people are they're like, I want a 14-pound bird, or I want a 20-pound bird. I have 10 people I'm feeding and I want X number of leftovers. So I try to time it to match market demand for something like turkey. And then chicken, yes, it totally depends on totally depends what you're going for. On average, most customers are looking for a 4.5 pound bird. You get bigger than that, you're starting to appeal to larger families, and there are people that are looking for larger products. And you also do get diversity in size within kill day. So some of your male birds might be more like 6 pounds when your female birds are closer to 4 pounds when you kill. And waiting longer with a fast growing chicken breed, the feed to growth ratio starts to dive off after like maybe 10 weeks. I don't know. It's not a hard science, but you can raise them bigger. The demand changes. If you're doing cut-ups, I would be more likely to raise birds a little longer because you get a higher meat ratio, and it would change things. So a lot of things to consider with that question, but it totally depends what you're going for, I guess.
Can I just, if you're going for profit though, and you agreed, I think that with chickens, you would have that option to go an extra week or two. Maybe that would be the ideal bird for parts. And so what I'm kind of getting at here is that your profit margins may actually be higher than what you described in that scenario. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely possible. If you raise birds a little bit bigger for parts specifically, then yeah, that I think that your margins would be higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? John, yeah.
Question for both of you. I just wondered, Taylor and Bob, because you take your chicken for parting to that USDA plant in Rhode Island, do you have access to sell to, say, Dan and Witts or the South Royalton market, like to markets where Jack doesn't have that because he's doing them at home?
Yes, absolutely. We can sell our chicken in Guam legally if we wanted to. Anywhere within the US. It definitely is an advantage. And to be perfectly honest with you, if this revision passes, we may still do some USDA processing because it's easier to do value-added products farther on down the line. The example that I can give you now is we don't have an excess of chicken backs. There is a market for people who are interested in feeding their pets, absolutely. But because we have USDA processed chicken, we can take our USDA processed chicken backs, bring them to a co-packer, and have them made into chicken broth, which then gets a USDA stamp through that process. And so chicken broth is a product that we also offer at Farmers Market. And that's something that I want to continue offering. There is an avenue to do that through state inspection and everything, but we'd have to do additional licensing and kitchen inspection through whether it's the Vermont cottage food laws or catering laws. There's all sorts of different steps involved with that. But yeah, absolutely. We have a much farther reach doing USDA than we do with just Vermont exempt. Interestingly enough, though, because of our location where we sell at Norwich, we get a lot of customers coming over from New Hampshire. Dartmouth, the school and the hospital, like you're looking at an audience of 20,000 people who live in the area. And we have a lot of customers from Enfield, Lyme, Hanover, and everything. And so like, even though we're restricted to selling in state for whole birds processed on farm, that it's like state borders are imaginary if you really think about it. But anyway, yes, we can sell it anywhere. It definitely gives us an advantage.
Great. Well, this is really very interesting testimony from all three of you. Thank you for joining us today. Before we wrap up, we do have Caroline Gordon here from rural Vermont, who has already testified on the bill. Was there anything else that you want to add, Caroline? Partly because you were here for the agency's comments earlier.
Sure. Very briefly. For the record, Caroline Gordon with Rural Vermont. Taking in sort of the proposed amendment from the agency from earlier. It seems like we're ruling out the chicken pot pie. And I haven't heard interest in the chicken pot pie from our members yet. So I don't think we would have a problem with the ready-to-cook poultry definition. Or either about the labeling for the 1,000 bird. I'm actually assuming that our members are labeling their birds, no matter at what exemption scale they're operating. So that would be significant for us.
Question
I
for
have a
Caroline?
question for Carol. We have two significant vendors, one in Morrisville, one in Stowe, that sell chicken pot pies to go. So why are they just, are they getting USDA chicken? Is that why they're able to do that?
Yeah, if they're currently doing business in Vermont, they wouldn't be able to do chicken pot pie under exemption. If my understanding is if we wouldn't adopt the agency's definition of ready-to-cook poultry, that the current USDA guidance definition of processing would also allow for chicken pot pie. So we would, with the adoption of the agency's proposal, go yet again a little more restrictive than what's currently allowed under standing USDA guidance, to my understanding.
John.
Caroline, and maybe Stephen, do I think, right, Grady said that the USDA changed this rule back in maybe 2007. As far as whole birds and things. And I was just wondering narratively, why this bill took as long as it did. Has this just been a bill that, like, everybody said, this would make a lot of sense for Vermont chicken farmers and it never got there, or you just discover?
The background story for this advocacy is kind of simple. On-farm slaughter and exemptions are legacy issues for rural Vermont, and since I'm the legislative director in 2019, we were definitely highly focused on advancing on-farm slaughter livestock. And we've done some good progress together on that. And my own understanding as legislative director was like, we cannot advance all the issues at the same time simply because of our lack of capacity. And especially also not want to overcommit your guys' attention. And so this year, one of our partner organizations we're working together with on our federal on-farm slaughter campaign, the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. They are an advocacy organization that also works on on-farm slaughter, and they do research on on-farm slaughter. And they've been publishing last fall a state-by-state overview that showcases what are the different state laws on poultry exemption. And when that came out, I looked at it, and I knew, of course, that many of our members, they want the parted birds, and we get that question, why can't we do the parted bird all the time? And then I looked at this new research, and I was like, wait a second, is it actually allowed? Do the feds allow for it? And I went into discourse with our partner organization from Farm to Consumer Legal Defense, and yes, the feds allow this. And I was like, calling Heather Supernan, we have to have a bill. We have to have a bill we just strike the whole bird out. I was like, this is an easy fix. Why not just strike it out? I'm sure this will be an easy fix. And now that we're not focusing on on-farm slaughter livestock here anymore, but in DC, I thought let's focus on poultry then. And immediately, poultry farmers like Jack Forster actually inspired that also when he reminded me when I bought my turkey from him for Thanksgiving. He was like, why can't we do the parted bird? And I was like, Jack, I just learned we actually can. Let's work on this. So that's the background story.
Thank you.
So we then have some proposed language changes to the bill that the committee needs to have a conversation about. I know we've run way past the time that we allocated for this conversation. Do we just sort of get a feel from folks, and if there's an interest in pursuing this, we can have the agency send Ledge Council the language, and we can see it in a, in the format we're accustomed to seeing it in, and in the font size we're accustomed to seeing it in. Right. You came in a little late.
Yeah, and so it came in a little late and just want a clarification around the hearts and livers piece.
Let's.
Yeah, I'm aware of. That is not the part of the complicated. Does this language allow for the sale of giblets as parts, or does it not?
Somebody with.
I think it does.
Yeah.
It says with or without.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was a little confused. Sorry, Steve. Sorry to be speaking to someone.
Steve, you want to come back up?
Sure, sorry. You had to throw in the font though one more time. It's hard to get it even printed in time, and then I saw it.
I was, it actually says 10 point, like you're doing it on, like you're typing this.
I mean, that would be fun too, but.
I was a little confused by the with or without, the with or without language, because that would seem to make sense as for a whole bird, but not for parts. So if you're parting out a bird and then you're selling it with or without the giblets, is it your understanding that also allows for selling those with not with or without anything else, but on their own?
I think in that last part of the sentence, it talks about separately packaging pieces. So I believe it can be either. I think you can sell the parts with or without them. So because it starts out with a list of things you can't have.
Yeah.
And then there's some that you can have or not. And then I think any of those things that fit within the things that you can sell, then you could package separately at the end. I think one thing that I heard about grinding, if I can just raise it, is that my understanding is that grinding would be allowed, but not additive,
Right.
not adding, right, not adding other things. But if it was only raw ground poultry, that would be permissible. And there, as one of our wonderful producers mentioned, that does create more risks. And so it's something to at least evaluate whether that's the better track or not, but we do think it's permissible. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Representative Supranat?
For some reason, struggling to wrap my mind around the labeling request. Because on the agency's website, under the poultry exemption guidance, it seems that the 1,000 category exemption and the 5,000 category exemption have the exact same language for labeling, with the only difference being that producers who are operating under the 1,000 bird exemption are not required to submit the label to the agency. And are you just saying that you want them to have to do that? Because it seems like all of the existing labeling language is pretty identical as required to be under the exemption for both.
So I didn't read the website, so I'm not sure how that, I was just looking at the statute, but yes, the idea is just to make the labeling requirement that it be submitted to the agency and that everybody's using the same label be applied consistently, regardless of which level of exemption you fit with it. So, yeah, and if our website's not, I hope it's accurate. I can't attest that it is. Well, I mean, I assume it is, but I didn't, in looking at the statutory change, I didn't contrast it with the website.
Representative Temple?
So two quick questions. The first one, on the back of what she just said, that would be specific for parts. Meaning that it sounds like you're adding an additional level of regulation and requirement in labeling because we're doing the parting.
The two things so for everyone, for all levels of the exemption, we propose that in addition to the current label, that you also name the product.
Okay.
So if you're selling the liver and the heart, that it says giblets.
And whole bird too.
Or whole bird would also be labeled.
Okay.
Because right now, the only option is whole bird. So the label doesn't talk about product. It's just producer, and then it fits with the exemption. So for everyone, we're proposing that you name what you're selling. The other part is for the 1,000 group. And I should say that right now it says fewer than 1,000, and the federal law is actually not more than. So we actually propose also that you correct that. It's one bird. It doesn't matter, but just making it consistent. But for the label right now, as I understand it, somebody who fits within the 1,000 bird exemption does not have to submit the label to the agency ahead of time. We are proposing that everyone meet that same step. And just so that, basically just so consumers are assured that they know what they're buying.
Yeah. And then under the 20,000 bird exemption, there's a reference here. I don't know what subsection it is, but there's a reference to 9 CFR subsection for that. And this standard isn't applied to any of the other exemption levels. What is that standard?
I believe those are additional sanitation standards.
Okay.
And Mike or Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, but those are additional level of sanitation.
I think we've heard testimony that that's referring to the federal requirement.
Okay, that are not required under the other two.
Correct.
Okay.
And that regulation that's cited is the very same one where the ready to cook poultry definition comes from.
Very good.
But rather than, and as the chair mentioned, it could simply refer to that regulation rather than repeating the definition. That's just a judgment about what works best.
Okay.
So let me just ask whether there's a sense that we might want to at least have Ledge Council show us this language.
Suitable format.
Yeah, well, and perhaps interpret again for us, if that would be helpful. In which case, if that's the sense of the committee, we can ask the agency to forward this document to Mike O'Grady, and then later he can come in and we can walk through that. Mike.
I have a couple of questions and maybe a point of clarification as well. Is a giblet?
As I understand it, it's liver, heart, gizzard, I think.
So it's not kidneys.
I think kidneys are separately mentioned in this definition.
Yeah, kidneys are.
They are, yeah.
It's not the neck, because the neck often comes.
I think it is not the neck. Is that right, Julie? Is that, yeah.
The giblet or giblet?
I think it's both. I think you can do it both ways.
It's depending on the family, right? Giblet family.
That's that. Which is it?
So my second question is the definition of ready to cook. It says that it can, and it is not suitable, it doesn't need further processing. But the USDA allows further processing within a restaurant. So are you still allowing further processing within a restaurant?
The way that I was trying to draft that language, Mike, and it was quick, was that the ready to cook would apply to sales directly to consumers or to restaurants. Restaurants could then continue to process as they always have. And then for the personal use, it would still just be poultry parts. So if you're raising your own chickens and slaughtering them, you can do whatever you want with a bird within the exemption. But if you're selling to others, then it would be this ready to cook definition.
Just, sorry, just playing my part here. The Oxford definition of giblets is liver, heart, gizzard, and neck.
And neck.
Well, on the Ask USDA, it left out the neck. I don't.
I mean, next should be.
The neck
one of the
usually
things
comes
that you can-
separate.
That can be sold regardless of whether they're in. the
Yeah.
definition.
Like that's a dictionary definition, or is that a?
That's a dictionary definition.
But is that Oxford? That's English.
No, it could be American Oxford.
It's Merriam-Webster.
Representative Supranant.
I think my slight trepidation with adopting the ready to cook language is the fact that ideally people already know that they need to cook their poultry and that it's so wordy and long to have to explain what ready to cook is, as opposed to the simple and effective removal of whole bird into parts. I think that's so much more visually. Folks can really conceptualize what that means, but ready to cook is such a bizarre abstract concept to me that is just like, of course we're going to cook our poultry. Like, and I don't know, that feels like that opens up a lot more conversation to me and it removes the clarity that I actually think that just the simple removal of whole bird really swiftly and effectively does. So
if I can respond to that, I understand totally what you're saying. To me, what it does is ensure that you're only selling raw poultry and that you're only selling the parts that are proper for consumption. And if you don't specify that, then you bring in the concept of the chicken pot pie, or you bring in the concept of further processing, which, as I understand it, the more that you process, because it takes longer and you have to keep the bird at the right temperature, that just raises the risk of bacterial growth. So I mean, I'm not saying that this definition couldn't be better done, but I think what it's saying is it's raw chicken, and these are the parts you can sell and the parts you can't, is what I think, yeah.
Sure, and I think I would then want to maybe fade away if we can. With grace, just have a line that says, we're not going to be having any prepared products while still keeping just the extraction of whole bird instead of this additional. I just feel like it adds a lot that maybe isn't quite as necessary.
I mean, one option might be is to, instead of calling it ready to cook poultry, call it raw poultry, but have the same definition, at least to the extent, I mean, you don't, again, we don't want to deviate from federal law because that raises a different thing. This isn't the only, it can just be poultry parts, understood, but we're trying to make it sort of convenient and transferable between federal and state law. But it could be raw poultry. I mean, ready to cook is just the word that is in use now. Yeah.
So I think that we should continue the committee discussion. I want to see, Dave, do you have a question for, or is this part of discussion?
I'd like to maybe ask, and I don't know your title or last name, but Julie, if she could come to the table at some point.
For answering a question?
Yes.
Would you like to come up and?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, what is your full title?
So I'm Julie Bovier, and my full title is Program Section Chief for the Meat Inspection Section at the HC of Agriculture, Food and Markets.
So I'd like to bring up the subject that you brought up, that I'm kind of, I'm also concerned about ground meat products. And I would hate for there to be a problem and it come back to this committee. And after making these changes, I think you understand my implication here. So I'm looking at the requirements under 20,000 or between 5 and 20,000 birds. There's these additional sanitary requirements at the larger scale. I'm wondering if those additional sanitary requirements would alleviate your concerns if ground meats were being prepared.
So those regulations are the USDA regulations for sanitary requirements. Excuse me about my voice. What that does with the 20,000 exemption, it really brings that poultry production USDA state CIS inspection ready. The only thing that's lacking basically is a food safety HACCP system. So those requirements that they're met, they have to abide by cleaning, sanitation, walls, floors, ceiling, drains, potable water, wastewater, all of that comes into play, pest control, hygiene, and the construction. All of that comes into play at that point. So those are very strict sanitation requirements that have to be followed by those specific regulations. So a lot of people, of course, they start out smaller, so they can't meet all those required regulations. So in other words, we're not sure if they have, potable water, they have washable walls, floors, and ceilings. So when you're talking about any kind of sanitation that does not meet those requirements, there is an added risk. So with a grinder, for instance, if that grinder is not, made out of proper equipment, if it's not clean and sanitized as it should be each and every day, if the person running it has poor hygiene, if the floors are all that construction is not into place, we're talking about poultry that's getting that added grinding. So it's going through that process. It's getting heated up as it goes through that process. And then what happens after? Is it being put into a clean tub? Is it putting directly into a cooler where it's going to cool down and suppress any of that, the pathogens that could grow at that point? We're not requiring them for taking temperatures. You know, that's part of the food safety HACCP plan that our USDA and our state facilities have. They have to have certain critical control areas where they're taking specific temperatures to make sure that product stays within, you know, the required.
That's not part of that.
That's not part of this.
Mhm.
No, these are just sanitation requirements.
Mhm.
So the more you're gonna do, the more you're gonna process, there's more of that risk for that pathogen growth.
Mhm.
So that's what we have to look at. So the higher you get, you know, you go from the 1,000, 5,000, 20,000, you're talking about a lot of birds you're processing at that point. So we need to make sure that they do follow under those sanitation requirements. You know, processing or grinding is always a sticky situation. We talked about the testimony today when they talked about the added value doing the sausage. We're also talking about, you know, what could be added into that. There's allergens. If that's not put into a label and people don't know that it's there, it's like that could be, you know, make somebody extremely sick, if not deathly sick. So there's all these circumstances that can come up when it comes to grinding.
So if we were to take those requirements and apply them to the lower tiers, would you be comfortable with ground material or ground meat?
Would I be comfortable? Of course, I'd be comfortable with that, but that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, I
You know,
understand.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask for some of these producers that are only producing.
But it would
over
open
1,000
up
of
that
them.
possibility,
Of course it would.
but it
Yeah.
would still require them to be under a stricter regime.
Of course it would.
That may be preferable to just telling them, no, they can't do it.
Sure. If they're going to grind, you're
Right.
talking specifically just for grinding.
Right, just specifically grind.
That's absolutely. I
Okay.
think that would be a
So right now, we're not telling them they can't grind. I think the interpretation that we've heard is that as written, it wouldn't be a restriction on grinding.
And I'm suggesting there should be a little bit of restriction.
On just grinding plain chicken?
Yes, that on the grinding part, if if a producer is producing a ground chicken product, that they should be under a stricter regime if they are at the lower.
But a ground chicken product can only be ground chicken, because you
That's-
can't add things to it.
That's right. So that's what I'm talking about. So like prepackaged ground
Ground
chicken.
chicken.
Okay. So, thank you very much for coming back. I think what we'll do is stop for the moment.